Horace, a policeman, was making rock Cornish game hens for a special supper. The game hens are frozen solid, Horace thought. He was wearing his blue uniform pants. Inside the game hens were the giblets in a plastic bag. Using his needle-nose pliers, Horace extracted the frozen giblets from the interior of the birds. Tonight is the night of the policeman's ball, Horace thought. We will dance the night away, but first these game hens must go into a 350-degree oven. Horace shined his black dress shoes. Would Margot put out tonight, on this night of nights? Well, if she didn't, Horace regarded the necks of the birds, which had been torn asunder by the pliers. No, he reflected, that is not a proper thought, because I am a member of the force. I must try to keep my hatred under control. I must try to be an example for the rest of the people. Because if they can't trust us, the blue men... In the dark outside the policeman's ball, the horrors waited for Horace and Margot. Margot was alone. Her roommates were in Provincetown for the weekend. She put pearl-colored lacquer on her nails to match the pearl of her new-bought gown. Police colonels and generals will be there, she thought. The Pendragon of police himself. Whirling past the dais, I will glance upward. The pearl of my eyes meeting the steel gray of high rank. Margot got into a cab and went over to Horace's place. The cab driver was thinking, a nice-looking piece. I could love her. Horace removed the birds from the oven. He slipped little gold frills, which had been included in the package, over the ends of the drumsticks. Then he uncorked the wine, thinking, this is a town without pity, this town. For those whose voices lack the crack of authority. Luckily, the uniform. Why won't she surrender her person? Does she think she can resist the force? The force of the force? These birds are delicious. Driving Horace and Margot smoothly to the armory, the new cab driver thought about basketball. Why do they always applaud the man who makes the shot? Why don't they applaud the ball? It is the ball that actually goes into the net. The man doesn't go into the net. Never have I seen a man going into the net. 20,000 policemen of all grades attended the annual fete. The scene was Camelot, with gay colors and burgese. The interior of the armory had been roofed with lavish tenting. Police colonels and generals looked down on the dark uniforms, white gloves, silvery ball gowns. Tonight? Horace, not now. This scene is so brilliant, I want to remember it. Horace thought, it? Not me? The Pendragon spoke. I ask you to be reasonable with the citizens. They pay our salaries after all. I know that they are difficult sometimes, obtuse sometimes, even criminal sometimes, as we often run across in our line of work. But I ask you, despite all, to be reasonable. I know it is hard. I know it is not easy. I know that, for instance, when you see a big car, a 70 Biscayne hardtop, cutting around a corner at a pretty fair clip, with 3 in the front and 3 in the back, and they're all mixed up, ages and sexes and colors, your natural impulse is to, I know your first thought is, all those people together, and your second thought is, force. But I must ask you in the name of force itself to be restrained. For force, that great principle, is most honored in the breach and the observance. And that is where you men are, in the breach. You are fine men, the finest. You are Americans. So for the sake of America, be careful, be reasonable, be slow. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. And now I would like to introduce Vercingetorix, leader of the firemen, who brings us a few words of congratulation from that fine body of men. Waves of applause for the Pendragon filled the tented area. He is a handsome older man, Margot said. He was born in a western state and advanced to his present position through raw merit, Horace told her. The government of Czechoslovakia sent observers to the policeman's ball. Our police are not enough happy, Colonel General Sapicki explained. We seek ways to improve them. This is a way. It may not be the best way of all possible ways, but also I like to drink the official whiskey. It makes me gay. A bartender thought, who is that yellow-haired girl in the pearl costume? She is stacked. The mood of the ball changed. The dancing was more serious now. Margot's eyes sparkled from the jorums of champagne she had drunk. She felt Horace's delicately game hen-flavored breath on her cheek. I will give him what he wants, she decided, tonight. His heroism deserves it. He stands between us and them. He represents what is best in the society: decency, order, safety, strength, sirens, smoke. No, he doesn't represent smoke. Firemen represent smoke. Great, billowing, oily black clouds. That Vercingetorix has a noble look. With whom is Vercingetorix dancing at present? The horrors waited outside patiently. Even policemen, the horrors thought. We get even policemen in the end. In Horace's apartment, a gold frill was placed on a pearl toe. The Horace had moved outside Horace's apartment. Not even policemen and their ladies are safe, the horrors thought. No one is safe. Safety does not exist. Ha 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 ha.
Mr. Barthelme, in the story which we've just heard, The Policeman's Ball, you speak in a voice that in many ways reminds us of the world that we live in, the world of reality, and yet there are perceptions and moves away from reality that are sometimes disorienting.
It's like that Woody Guthrie song. It takes a worried man to sing a worried song. The disorientation is not mine. I don't own it. I have no patent on it. It is what is to be perceived around us.
The world itself is disoriented.
Well, this is hardly an original observation. It's been made over and over again. And I think what I'm doing is rendering rather than creating it, the disorientation.
What never ceases to impress me in all of your stories is the fact that they are funny, that they're humorous. I would be very hard put to define the humor. I don't know what my question is, except that
Well, I have the answer. It lies, I think, in something Gregory Bateson said, which is that humor is the great alternative to psychosis, and people cope by means of humor, and that's, I think, why it's there.
Yeah. I sometimes think that if Franz Kafka had lived in the mid-20th century and had made enough money to afford stripy shirts, he might be very much like Donald Barthelme.
Kafka, of course, used to read his stories aloud to his friends, laughing his head off, whereas other people, regard Kafka as the very, home of Central European miserableism.
But again, you have that moving in and out of dreams, from dream to reality, with all the rules changing. You can nothing solid.
Well, I think if you went down the street and stood on the corner of 3rd Avenue and 65th and did a 360-degree pan a la Godard's camera, and what registered on brain, the information that came in, would be pretty unsettling. I mean, it's not people in cities are not the same people as people years and years ago, where the vista was a few trees and a field and perhaps a mule. They're different kinds of people because their brains are saturated with a hell of a lot of information, a lot of it indigestible and much of it threatening in the way that neither the field, the trees, nor the mule are. I think we're different people, especially city dwellers.
I was just thinking that in the title story of your book, City Life, a couple of girls enter a city and are almost immediately a series of catastrophes or very important events in their lives starts. Is it right to think that the very complication of all these tall buildings determines our lives in a way that our lives were never determined by simpler, more pastoral times?
Men make cities. I mean, it's not... Tall buildings don't make themselves. Men group themselves together in cities for certain reasons. So there may be reasons for cities and for cities being the way they are, which will not appear until the historians of this period write it 100 years from now, if there are any historians.
In one sense, the real characters of your works are the edifices, and the human beings who frequent these edifices are simply addenda. At one point in Snow White, the speaker, the narrator, says, perhaps we're wrong to wash the buildings and tend the vats and carry our money to the vaults.
My father was and is an architect, and perhaps over years and years of dinner table conversation, I came to feel or was impressed by the importance of buildings, especially buildings being done right.
I'm saying that sometimes the buildings are more actualized than the people. The people are sketchy, but the buildings you have a real sense of, and they're such objects of love and care. And at the same time, you're saying it's wrong, it's sick, it shouldn't be done, but we can't fight it.
That's called ambivalence.
Yeah.
I'm working on a book now in which central character is an architect, an insane architect who works his way back through the history of architecture. He begins by being a modernist, as my father was, and then he things happen to him, and he starts designing cathedrals. I've always been attracted to flat characters rather than round characters. I'm very fond of furniture too. If you want to talk about furniture,
people are the furniture of your work. Your language is sometimes very, I would say, purposefully stilted, and sometimes you use idioms or expressions that simply do not exist in the English language, but you pretend they do. One that comes to mind was Snow White saying, "Well, slash me if I will." What's the purpose of this? This isn't English.
Snow White is also fond of, or in Snow White there are things that are glistering rather than glimmering. Well, glistering is an archaic form of glittering. It wakes up the prose a bit to have such expressions in them, and of course there's nothing funnier or more delightful than really highly stilted language.
I quote from the book, "Unspeakable Practices, Unnatural Acts." Endings are elusive, middles are nowhere, but worst of all is to begin, to begin, to begin. What is your writing method?
Well, it differs from piece to piece. There are certain magic procedures I invoke to begin. It's very much a matter of lumping things together until the mixture is, the soup is, rich enough or substantial enough.
You do have a story called The Falling Dog, which I take to be a story about artistic inspiration, about a sculptor who in some way has lost his inspiration after doing a long series of yawning men, wonderful image, yawning men, modeled, I guess, on Francis Bacon's Screaming Men, or perhaps.
Screaming Popes.
Screaming
Popes.
Popes.
Really what I had in mind there was Trova's Falling Man image, which he has, which I admire very much, and which he's done a wonderful series of changes on over the last 6 or 7 years. But the problem is that the Falling Man, I suspect, is not going to nourish Trova forever.
But in
you have to change. There has to be development, and when you are, as this sculptor was, between images, as it were, you're in a very, very anxiety-creating position.
Now, this sculpture was inspired by the fact that a dog fell on him from a window and knocked him down.
Right.
All right, since we're talking about artistic inspiration, what was your inspiration for the Falling Dog story?
Well, I was taking a walk, and an extremely large dog barked at me from a third-floor window. And, of course, he didn't really fall on me or jump on me, but it occurred to me it would have been quite unpleasant had he followed up his aggression by leaping out of the window on my back. And that was the genesis of that particular story.
We were talking about Franz Kafka before. Another element that reminded me of Kafka was that in your story called Robert Kennedy Saved from Drowning, you refer to your hero simply as K, which is a Kafkaesque device, if anyone is. Now, what is that story about? Is it really about Robert Kennedy?
No, I don't really think it's so much about Robert Kennedy. And in fact, I used the initial so I wouldn't have to keep saying Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy. Obviously, I was also aware of Joseph K. and so forth and so on, but it wasn't so much that I wanted the Joseph K. association as I was trying to avoid saying Kennedy, Kennedy, Kennedy. I think the story is more about hagiolatry than it is about Kennedy.
Hagiolatry.
The idolizing of culture figures, originally saints. And it was really more about what has been written about Kennedy than it was about Kennedy himself. There was one part of the story that was true, but in the sense that I personally observed it when Kennedy came into the gallery and made some remark about well, we know the very geometric work on view. We know he has a ruler, and that I saw, but the rest, of course, was whole cloth. And it's really about the treatment of the culture hero by the press rather than anything.
Well, here we do have a Barthelme theme, because you talk about Kennedy coming into a gallery, observing a geometric painting and saying, well, at least we know the artist that he has a ruler. And then in your story, we switch, or almost cut, to the artist who's standing in a corner and
lurking
hating,
behind the pillar.
Lurking behind the pillar and hating Kennedy, just as in your story about the policeman's ball, we know what the taxi drivers are thinking.
Well, you know, there are elaborate theories of point of view, what you can and cannot do. I decided that I didn't care about keeping the work internally consistent, and matter of fact that I would prefer the inconsistency. Snow White has one voice, and you don't know which of the seven men the voice belongs to, and it shifts. The voice shifts from one to the other, which is against the law in terms of theories of point of view.
Have you discovered a new form? Do you think you've shown the way to some degree to the writing of the future?
I certainly would not claim to have discovered any new forms. I think everything I've written can be traced to earlier work by other people. A lot of what I do comes out of Beckett, although I don't think it's like Beckett. Joyce is obviously there. Kafka is obviously there. There are a number of American writers who are doing Tom Pynchon, and John Barth, who are doing not exactly similar work, but at least work that is in the same universe of discourse.
Well, how do you make a living out of these books?
What I would describe as a precarious living. I mean, if you it goes up and down. It's become less precarious in recent years, but some kind of living.
Well, it's not from the books themselves, is it?
Well, it's a combination of the books and from the New Yorker.
The magazine.
Yes. They treat writers, as you know, very handsomely, both financially and as people.
What kind of reaction has come into the New Yorker about your work?
When they ran Snow White, they did the Snow White complete in one issue, and they got a lot of cancellations of subscriptions and a lot of angry letters. Very often the angry letters came from MDs, you know, with very good addresses.
I wonder why medical doctors, what's the connection? Is there something here that we should understand?
God knows.
You've said that you thought that all the arts were coming together in this period of history. What did you mean by that?
I think writers have to compete with the films. The films do so many things so well, so quickly, so economically, that there is a pressure from the film on literature, very, very close to the famous pressure put on painting by the invention of photography, and for some of the same reasons. I think Joyce found the way out of the difficulty for writers. Joyce changed the traditional novel, shook it to its foundations, and I think that that was a response principally to the invention of the motion picture. And I think we're still trying to cope with it.
I was interested to find out, after reading your book, which is highly poetic, fragmented, and in some points very difficult to understand, that you used to be a newspaper man.
That's true. I did a number of years in the newspaper business.
Perhaps we can end this conversation with your, if you would, reading your own account from the book City Life and from the story Brain Damage of your newspaper career.
All right, fine, sure. I worked for newspapers. I worked for newspapers at a time when I was not competent to do so. I reported inaccurately. I failed to get all the facts. I misspelled names. I garbled figures. I wasted copy paper. I pretended I knew things I did not know. I pretended to understand things beyond my understanding. I oversimplified. I was superior to things I was inferior to. I misinterpreted things that took place before me. I over and underinterpreted what took place before me. I suppressed news the management wanted suppressed. I invented news the management wanted invented. I faked stories. I failed to discover the truth. I colored the truth with fancy. I had no respect for the truth. I failed to heed the adage, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. I put lies in the paper. I put private jokes in the paper. I wrote headlines containing double entendres. I wrote stories while drunk. I abused copy boys. I curried favor with advertisers. I accepted gifts from interested parties. I was servile with superiors. I was harsh with people who called on the telephone seeking information. I gloated over police photographs of sex crimes. I touched type when the makeups weren't looking. I took copy pencils home. I voted with management in guild elections.
And with that passionate confession, we end our conversation with the American writer, Donald Barthelme. This is Stephen Banker in New York.